Okay, let's talk a little bit about inclusive leadership, what it looks like, what it feels like, what the parts are that we need to consider when we think about inclusive leadership. So the first thing to say is that through my research, I found that there's lots of opinions on inclusive leadership. There's lots of material out there where coaches or training professionals assert really strong opinions based on maybe some limited research or often none, simply based on their preference or their understanding of inclusive leadership. And while this might be helpful for some people, it also causes some issues because it means that the conversations about inclusive leadership are coming from a place of opinion and not necessarily from a place of impact. So they're measuring what the intention of a leader is or what the intention of the coach is, but not necessarily looking at the impact. So what I want to talk about a little bit are some of the things that have been pointed towards in more robust research. And again, in this area, research is limited in the sense that it's about experiences. So you're looking again and again at different studies to find something that has commonality and ground. And that isn't as easy to do, which is why I understand people are leaning on their opinions and their lived experience of coaching leaders, or leaders are doing what they think is inclusive. Totally appreciate that. What I'm hoping this video is going to do is bring a little bit of an opinion a little bit further than just an opinion, and to think about the fact that while there are lots of behaviours involved in inclusivity, and there's lots of things like microaggressions that we talk about trying to minimise, there's also something to think about, which are what are the micro-behaviours of inclusion. And again, there's limited research in this. The research that has been done suggests that listening, that not micromanaging the moment, inviting in difficult people. So we often in organisations label people as difficult because they have contradicting opinions or perspectives. And inclusive leadership is about inviting those opinions and those people to the conversation so that the results are more inclusive of multiple different perspectives and points of view. This is so much easier said than done. And I can understand why a lot of the support for leadership is about making their lives easier, giving them skills and tools. And I get that, and I work in leadership development, so I understand that and appreciate it. And I think that we are selling ourselves short as the professionals helping leaders develop, but we're also selling the leaders short and the organisations short, because what we're doing is limiting their exposure to the difficult part of inclusive leadership, because maybe it's difficult to sell that. Whereas if we think about the people we're excluding from the room and we actively look for the people that aren't in the organisation, that we're not accessing as recruits, the people that we promote and what they speak like and how they behave and what opinions that they bring, if we start looking beyond that and we start looking for who we aren't bringing into the room and who we sometimes cringe. So think about the people that you actually go, I don't want them in the room because they'll drive me nuts. Their inclusive leadership is bringing them into the room, and not just bringing them into the room, but listening to them. And the small amount of research that's happened has pointed us towards that. So inclusive leadership isn't just about being nicer or challenging the status quo or using nice language or having attended diversity training. Inclusive leadership requires an element of being uncomfortable. And I don't know how many trainings you've been to that's what's been encouraged. But if you want to be more inclusive in your leadership, or you're a coach or professional supporting leaders to be more inclusive, we need to help, and we need to discuss the fact that we need to regulate our opinions about people and our emotions about them. We need to know that we're probably not being inclusive if we're ultimately comfortable in the setting, and that we need to be comfortable with each other, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're comfortable with the topics that we're discussing or the points of view. And that's where you're looking out for groupthink, you're looking out for yes people. That tends to be what's rewarded unconsciously by people because it's easier. But actually inclusion is an active practice. It isn't something that comes naturally for any of us, even if we come from a diverse background, because we still have our in-group, out-group mentality, and we still have our us and them thinking. So inclusion, there's nobody who doesn't need to work on inclusion. Both their activity in being included and are they assimilating to be included, which isn't necessarily ideal, but also our ability to include others in different settings. And yeah, so there's a lot to think about when we think about inclusive leadership, and it does go beyond some of the kind of standard ideas of just being kinder or nicer or inviting in people from different backgrounds. It's not just different backgrounds. We need to invite people from different thoughts, schools of thought, and we need to invite people who aren't necessarily going to agree with our way of doing things, because assimilation bias is where we as individuals start to assimilate the in-group. And so we can bring people in who are different, but if they're assimilating the in-group, we aren't getting diversity of thought or practice. And it's a bit more complicated because inclusive leadership requires an awareness of ourselves that we generally don't have to have in other types of leadership. While it's promoted that we do have, it's not always required, but inclusive leadership requires that, because that's how you can tell whether you're really practicing inclusive leadership or you're ticking the boxes. And I think, and this is totally opinion piece, I think that we don't sell this, we don't advertise this, we don't share this because it's harder to sell. As consultants, people don't necessarily want to hear that this is going to be hard work. And when we go in and I work with leaders or executives, they don't necessarily want to hear that they are part of the problem. What they want to hear is a solution that can be done often by others. So this isn't an easy thing to engage with. And yet it's something that we're talking about an awful lot. And we hear the language thrown around, and we hear people, and people genuinely want to be inclusive. Like, the intention to be inclusive, I don't doubt. But the impact and the actions of being inclusive, they're not as comfortable as the intention to be inclusive is. And I just wanted to kind of name that and see if you have any thoughts on it. It's not necessarily a popular opinion, but I believe if we're going to invest in change and training and development, let's invest in the ones that are sustainable and that are impactful. Let's really think about the impact of what we're doing, both as the professionals working with leadership teams and the leadership teams themselves. Inclusive leadership is beyond one individual. So it's not just that the leadership team does this, it's that the coach or the development person brings this awareness in with them and integrates it into how they work with somebody. It's that the leadership teams are able to bring it to their direct reports and have conversations that really bring our attention, not just to intention, but action and impact. And accountability. So we reflect on what we do, both as the development person, as the leadership team, and as those reporting into the leadership teams. It needs to be integrated throughout the systems, and not just the system as in the organisation we're working with. We need to integrate it into how we as externals bring it into the system. And so it is a little bit more complex than just teaching a skill or naming a thing. And yet it doesn't have to be complicated, because if we embrace the fact that it's complex, we can start working with it with a lot more ease. And if we can embrace the fact that discomfort is part of this work, and we can name that outrightly and we can allow room for that, then it doesn't have to be so complicated. While it's complex, it doesn't have to be so complicated. So they're my thoughts so far on inclusive leadership. And as I'm reading more and more, I'm learning more and more about myself, about systems, about others. And it's making sense of the systems I've been in and the way that power is distributed and used, the way that people are promoted and rewarded, and the way that people are brought into the company. So there's lots of levels to inclusive leadership. And I think that I'm definitely meeting leaders who have capacity for it. But if we're mis-selling it, or we're, undermining the real important parts of inclusive leadership, then they're not going to be able to step forward into their potential and develop their leadership skills to be inclusive. So we need to start by thinking about what we're saying is inclusive. And we need to think about what we're buying in terms of HR and OD, training and development teams, when we're looking for training in terms of inclusive leadership. So actually we all have a place and a role in inclusive leadership, even if we aren't the leadership team. Yeah, so they're my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can pop me an email at info@silewalsh.com, or if you want to have a chat with me about your organisation confidentially, just pop me an email and just ask for that, and we can arrange a consultation, which will be confidential. And we can see if working together, or if there are options that haven't been considered yet that you could consider. Thank you. Take care.